Hi, ladies. Hopefully, you've had a wonderful spring break and you're ready to get started again. It won't be that long until it's already finals and you're having your summer vacation. So, this week, you're going to read about two really important things in church history. One of them is the Renaissance, and the other is Martin Luther. And Martin Luther started the Protestant Reformation. And so, first, when you read the intro, you'll read about kind of the difference between the medieval era and what they're calling the modern era. And before I start talking about the reading for this week, I do want to remind you of some upcoming things. So this week you're going to participate in discussion number 3, and you're going to do your first post by Tuesday and respond to someone by Thursday. And then you also have a works cited page due on Friday. And this needs to be listing at least 4 outside sources for your research paper. The actual research paper isn't due till April 5th, and you will take a quiz next Friday. So anyway, I want to talk about the Renaissance and Martin Luther, and of course the book will go into much more depth, but I think the Renaissance is such an important time period, and it's also very important to remember the bubonic plague or the Black Death that would have happened in Europe right before this, and it killed 1/3 of people in Europe, so everyone knew someone who died. And this really obviously led to all sorts of people grieving, and they found art as a way to express their grief. The word Renaissance means rebirth, and there actually was a rebirth in both the northern part of Europe and the southern part. In the north, this was more of an intellectual rebirth, and in the south, it was an artistic rebirth. Probably both reacting to the bubonic plague, and both sort of responding to like a new way of thinking. And I think most of this was actually prompted by the invention of the printing press. Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press, and as soon as he did, the first thing he printed was a Bible. And suddenly it was a lot easier for people to be literate, to be able to read the Bible, to read the writings by all of the saints, and to really start to think for themselves about faith. So before that, in the medieval era, there was a real focus on community and, kind of needing to survive, to rely on the community in order to do that. And now there became a more emphasis on individualism and how individually, we're responsible for our fate also. Also, there was, kind of new way of doing business that was much more international, not to the degree it is today, but there were definitely businesses that had ships going to many different ports, and banking became something that was much more international too. One of the families that were bankers were the Medicis, and they were in southern Italy, primarily in Florence, Italy. And they had a lot of money because of their business, and so they started to patronize the arts, and this meant that they would hire different artists to do this great artwork for them, and they would buy work done by some of these famous artists. And also, Florence, Italy, because of that, became kind of the heart of the Renaissance, this rebirth when it came to art, and this included not just visual art, but literature as well. And some of the great minds of the Renaissance all kind of flocked to Florence, Italy. Again, in the north, the rebirth was more of an intellectual one, so there was much more focus on intelligence, on returning to the classics, studying Greek and Latin, trying to read some of these original philosophers and theologians and their work, and also to start more critically interpret the Bible, to think about, what we can know about the Bible, like what do we know about its authors and its audience, and when it was written and the history behind it and how it was put together, and, really trying to listen to it in the context it was intended. And so that was all new as well. And so you'll see some great examples of religious art, and you'll also read about some of the more specifics to the Renaissance, but it was a really important movement. And I don't know if the Renaissance hadn't happened, if the Reformation would happen, but that's the next big thing that you'll read about, starting with a bit about the story of Martin Luther. So Martin Luther was a German, and he had intended to become a lawyer. He had gotten his master's degree. He was going to go to law school. And then he was struck by lightning and actually promised that if he survived, he would become a monk. So he did become an Augustinian monk and priest, and he was also very intellectual. And he would write a lot about, kind of discrepancies he saw. And there were a lot of issues happening that he had problems with. One of those was what's called the selling of indulgences. There were some priests who were kind of promising people sort of a fast pass to heaven by spending less time in purgatory. And they were taking money and saying that they would make this happen, which of course they couldn't do. Also, he didn't agree necessarily with the authority of the Pope. He didn't agree with some of the teachings of the church, primarily ones that weren't rooted in the Bible. And so in his opinion, nothing should be a law in the church unless it came straight from the Bible. And because of that, he also didn't believe in most of the sacraments. He did believe in baptism and Eucharist, but those are two sacraments that we see Jesus participating in the Bible. And so he, getting fed up, he wrote down his thoughts in what's famously known as the 95 Theses, and he posted them on a door of a church in Germany. It's actually, some people think possible that it was his friend who actually posted it, that he sent the 95 Theses to a friend and that the friend posted it. And within religious realms, it really wasn't that uncommon to post a list of things that you wanted to debate with someone, but usually that was seen by other priests and monks and not necessarily publicly put on the front of a door. And also the fact that now people were more literate thanks to the invention of the printing press, they could read what he had to say, and a lot of people agreed with him and what he was saying. So his big arguments were, first of all, that the Pope should not have the power that the Pope has, that everything that's a teaching of the church should be based on Scripture alone. He believed that our faith alone is what saved us and got us to heaven. He was against the selling of indulgences, and he also pointed out a lot of other corruption within the church. Word got to the Vatican that he had written this, and they asked him to recant everything he said. They gave him like 30 days to do that. He refused to do that. He kind of went into hiding because his life was at risk. He was excommunicated by the church, and there were lots of people that agreed with what he had to say. And so there started to be like revolts in the streets with like the peasants. And at first, Martin Luther was really in favor of that until he saw a lot of death and destruction as a result. And so he really backed off supporting the peasants' revolt. Eventually, people took what Martin Luther had to say and formulated a whole new religion based on that. And from there, lots of different religions sprung up, a lot of different leaders who agreed with part of what Martin Luther said, but not everything, and so they had their own set of teachings. And you'll read more about that as we go through the textbook, but this chapter that you're reading for this week is primarily about Martin Luther. I hope you find it interesting. I hope you have a good week and the transition back to school is okay for you. Hopefully we'll have nice weather this week, and I'm really praying for all those people affected by the flooding. I'm sure you are too. I hope that doesn't affect any of you or your families, but I'll keep praying for that. And I will talk to you again next week.